Hi, I'm Gary, and today we'll be tying the gun. Last time I tied the G-force, which is a mayfly pattern. The gun is a heavily weighted fly designed to fish on the bottom. It imitates larger mayflies, stoneflies. It's tied on the jig hook. The name came about, it was evolved from the G-force. It has moving spanflex legs, a large tungsten bead on the front, and fishing with a friend, we were looking to try and name this new pattern. And Herman said, that fly has all the triggers. Well, there came the name, the gun. It's tied on the jig hook. And the advantage of the jig hook is that it actually swims upside down if you fish an appropriate tungsten bead on it. And that has an advantage when you can bounce it on the bottom and not get hooked up. It's often fished in conjunction with a smaller and lighter fly above it on what we would call a French or Euro nymphing. The tungsten bead itself, I tend to fish them oversize, which helps with getting the fly to the bottom and helps keeping a tight line connection when you're actually fishing the fly. These are faceted tungsten beads, which means they've got flats on them, which adds more reflective surfaces than a standard round tungsten bead. It's also a slotted bead, which is designed to be fished on a jig hook. That's quite different from the normal countersunk bead, which doesn't sit quite as low on a jig hook. So the fly, as a rule, when it actually will be fished, will end up fishing upside down. One of the main changes between the gun and the G-force is the use of spanflex legs. Now you can use rubber, but spanflex is a far better material to use. It doesn't break down under UV like rubber does, and it's a lot stronger. In fact, if you take a piece, you can really stretch it and not break it. So that's quite convenient. So it ends up with a very, very strong fly. Again, we're using the UV flashabou for the UV trigger that it has. Another nice thing is that it builds a really thin body. So the advantage of the thin body is that your fly sinks faster. You don't want to counteract the nice advantages of your tungsten bead by having a fly that has a lot of bulk. So bead on the hook, and then we need a small amount of lead wire. I don't use this for weight as such. This is purely so we can actually trap the bead at the eye of the hook and have it not slide around. So a couple of wraps of lead. It can be a little messy. Push it in the slot of the bead, right behind the bead. Push it in there tight, and use some super glue to keep it in place. I don't like my flies falling apart, and I hate my beads moving back. Right. Attach the thread. Again, I'm using nano. So it's really, really strong. Snip it off, unfortunately, because you can't break it. Now I'll tie the spanflex tail in. This is one strand of spanflex doubled onto the thread, held vertically, placed on top and positioned. Have to be too critical of the positioning, but it can't be completely skew. That's about the only problem. You've got to make sure that your tail is not completely skew. But as long as it is pretty much V-shaped, that's good enough to start. This is going to move around a lot when you actually fish the fly, so it doesn't really matter. It doesn't have to be perfect. Don't cut it too short, rather leave it overly long right now. Tying in the wire, again, the rib is tied down the side of the fly. Again, purely for the fact that the fly is wider than it is tall. It's the same as the naturals. They tend to be wider, flat top and bottom. Right, thread on, wire on. Again, I'm going to use a hotspot. In this case, it's a hen's body quill. It's a chartreuse color. Body quill on. It acts as an additional trigger, and you can see it has a UV element too when you shine the UV torch on it, which you'll see later. Hotspot, again, whatever size you like. Thread can also be used. You find the appropriate fluorescent orange. On the black one, I like to use chartreuse and black with a silver bead. On the other ones, the brown ones with the golden gun, I will use brown with a gold bead and a hot orange butt. Right, so trap the body quill, cut it off. Again, the UV flash tied in on top of the hook. Advance the thread forward. Again, the advantage of using the white thread is that your flash is very, very visible, and the white shines through. You're going to color it now with a permanent marker. Careful not to cut your flash on the hook point. Right, bring it forward, hold vertically, one turn to wrap it down, two turns, pull it out the way, cut a section, and use that for the wing case. After cutting the wing case, we're now going to colour the flash. Again, top and sides, not the underside, because the underside of the mayfly is lighter than the top. Now yes, the fly does fish upside down, so maybe that's not really necessary, but it doesn't always stay upside down, so I like the variation. Right, so top and sides are coloured. Underside is lighter. You will get some bleeding of the permanent marker to the underside, so it's not quite completely white. Run the ribbing wire forward, evenly spaced turns, keep some tension going here. You get to the front, pull the flash back, wire in front, a couple of turns to lock it in, and snap the wire off. Now we tie on the legs. I've pre-cut some legs, rather cut them a little longer than too short. The nice thing about the appropriate product, the Daddy Long Legs, is it's actually straight. Some of the other Spanflex products can be quite curved in shape, and that can make it more difficult to actually tie in the legs. Right, place them, leave them overly long again, trap them one side. Then to tie the one on the far side, you need to actually take your hands to the far side of the vise, slide it up, and using the thread tension from the bobbin holder hanging there, you actually trap the other leg in on the far side using thread tension. Now we're going to tie the dubbing in, and this is purely to form a small thorax. You don't want to make it too big, but also to use to position the legs and actually make sure that they're spaced. I like to wet my fingers if the dubbing's being unruly, like it sometimes can be. Slide it up, split the legs, at least a turn in the middle, and then depending on how the legs lay, you might want to put a turn behind some legs, again forward. That was a good choice of good amount of dubbing. Splay it between and pull those back. There we go. So now the legs are trapped in, positioned. We'll pull the wing case forward. One turn, two turns to lock it in. Don't pull too hard now, you might cut the flash. Not the easiest to actually cut it really short, but there we go. So now the wing case is in there. We're now going to colour the thread for the whip finish. 4 or 5 centimeters is enough. Don't have to use super glue, and be careful with the rubber or Spanflex legs with super glue. If you touch them, they tend to either bend the legs, and if you pull them, they may then break. So you need to be a little careful now when you do the whip finish that you don't get the super glue on the legs. But done correctly, whip finish is done. Always do a second. Single turn is often good enough. And trim the thread. Right. Be careful. Make a mistake now when you're trying to trim a bit of errant dubbing, and you'll end up cutting your legs off. So the legs are too long, and always will start out too long. You can use your thumbnail to reposition them by pressing the dubbing to make some of them bend backwards. I like to keep the front legs shorter than the back legs. The back legs need to be longer than the length of the body. The front legs need to be about 2/3 the length of the body. I hold them together, cut them again. Rather cut a couple of times than cut once and realize that you cut it too short, because then you're going to have a problem trying to fix your legs. Take it out the vise, it's often easier to do. If you position the back legs together, hold, trim, that looks okay. Front legs may be a little long on this pattern, so let's trim them a little shorter. And the tail doesn't look too bad, it is a little long. Line them up and cut them shorter. Alright, once you've done the legs, we can now put them back in the vise and resin it. Again, I'm going to put the UV resin only on the back of the fly as well as the wing case area. This is to make sure that the trout's teeth can't rip the fly apart. The gun replaces other heavy mayfly patterns for me, like the Zac. It's a large mayfly, stonefly, Lithophobidae, which you often find in the northeastern Cape. I tie them in black, silver bead, chartreuse butt, as well as the golden gun, which is the gold bead brown with a hot orange butt. And those pretty much cover mayflies, stonefly patterns for me, and this is my primary weighted fly. Just make sure we're getting a good coating over the ribbing in the back. Okay. And then a couple of seconds with the torch. Oh, UV laser. After I saw this thing and realized it was a laser, it sold me completely. I mean, there's nothing more powerful than a laser when it comes to curing. And you're good to go. One or two minor trims of some extra dubbing. Careful that you don't cut your legs off. And you have it. The gun.